In just 22 days, Anchor's yield reserves are going to run out. In other words, go right to zero. Now, what does that mean for Anchor? What are the implications? What are the solutions? We're going to get into that here on Crypto Saver, so welcome. Now, some people might view this video and they might want to comment, hey, listen, like this is FUD, like you're being too negative. And so a couple of things I want to clarify here. I am currently holding Luna. I hold 496 Luna. I do want to see Luna go up in value. And obviously, Anchor has to succeed for that to happen. With that being said, when I look at these projects, whether it's on Terra or other blockchains, I always try to be as objective as humanly possible, right? I cannot consider my current holdings when it comes to trying to come up with my reasoning or my opinion about how things are going. So that's exactly what I will be doing in this video. Even though I hold Luna, I will kind of take some jabs at Anchor because I feel like it's well suited. So let's begin with some hard truth numbers. So right now, based on numbers from just a few hours ago, Anchor has to be paying out, Anchor is paying out $2,650,000 per day. That's the interest paid to those that are depositing. They are collecting $1,300,000 per day. Again, data based off right now, up to date from a couple hours ago. So what's the deficit? That deficit is $1,350,000. Half of the interest being paid out right now is coming from the yield reserve. And as a quick refresher, how does Anchor pay us the 19.5 yield reserve? It comes from when people are borrowing on the borrower side of Anchor. It comes from that interest that the borrowers are paying, and it's coming off the staking rewards from the collateral that the borrowers are providing, right? So in most cases, right now it's Luna. So if those two, if the interest being paid and the staking rewards from the collateral are not enough to fund the 19.5 interest, the yield reserve is supposed to be kicking in. And it's been kicking in hardcore for the past month. So let's visualize those numbers. So we're looking at the chart right now for the Anchor reserve. And we can kind of see there was a peak around December 10th. And afterwards, when we hit a peak of just about $79 million in the yield reserve, and then we've just been barreling down ever since then. I mean, at this point now, we're down with just about under 29 million. We're under 29 million while we are burning 1350 per day, 1,350,000 per day. So this chart here shows us the amount of interest that is required for Anchor to be paying out on a daily basis. This goes back to November. Look at this run up here. Look at how much capital was continuously being deposited into Anchor here until we hit this peak just 3 or 4 days ago, which aligns with kind of the drama that happened with Wonderland and Abracadabra and the Degen box. Again, suggest you to watch that video if you haven't. And I guess all the fear from that led to a lot of UST leaving Anchor specifically. We can kind of see it coming down. And this obviously coincides. I mean, this is not necessarily the deposits leaving from Anchor. This is actually less interest needing to be paid, but it obviously should coincide with one another. So we went from having to pay about 3.3 million on the 27th, just a few days ago, and now we have to kind of pay 2.6 million, which is the number that I ran by you guys earlier. So that's come down. But even then, if we now go over to what Anchor is actually collecting right now, it did go up today, but even then, we're currently sitting at around 1.3 million, far below the amount that needs to be paid out to the actual depositors. So how do I calculate that on February 22nd, all of a sudden the yield reserve will be zero? Well, that's pretty simple math, right? We can see that right now the yield reserve is at 29 million. We're burning 1,350,000. If you simply divide that number by 29 million, you will see that it will be just over 21 days or so. So I kind of rounded up in that case. Now, that can obviously change plus minus a few days until that point, because it does depend on if there's more people depositing, if there's more people borrowing, but it's not going to fluctuate by that much. The way it stands, no matter what, late February, that yield reserves can be drying up. So some people say, listen, we should let the yield reserve dry up and let Anchor actually just function. And if Anchor takes an X amount, they should just pay an X amount. That interest rate on the depositor side should be a variable interest rate. It shouldn't be a fixed interest rate of 19.5%. So the question is, what would that rate be if that was the case? If there was no yield reserve, that yield reserve was not going to be replenished by the TFL team, what would it be? Let's look at the charts. This would show us, without intervention from the yield reserve, how much is Anchor actually collecting percentage-wise. If the chart is green, that would tell you that during those times, Anchor was fully sustainable. It does not need a yield reserve during those moments. And if it's in the red, obviously that tells you it's actually collecting less than it's actually paying out. And the switch did occur also on December 10th. We went into a negative. We dipped below 20%. We've continued to come down. And if we go right about here, we can see what the number is. The magic number is 9.5%. 9.5%. If that yield reserve does not get replenished and nothing else changes, is the rate by which borrowers and the rate by which depositors keep entering the platform as they have been, if all that stays the same, you would be looking at a 9.5% return on Anchor instead of that 19.5% APY. So it's becoming clear that it hasn't been easy to attract borrowers. It's especially not easy to attract borrowers during a bear market when people are simply more fearful altogether. And the tricky thing here, as we look on the borrow page here, we can see that if you did want to borrow from Anchor, your net APR would actually be positive at this exact moment. And for those unaware, the reason why it's slightly positive is even though you're paying 11.73% in actual interest in UST, you're receiving an yield of 11.94% in ANC tokens. So if you were to trade out those ANC tokens the moment you'd receive them, you'd essentially after a year you would be break even. So it's clear that the borrower side is being heavily subsidized by ANC tokens, and the net APR is just slightly positive. So let's go back to this chart here. So even though the borrower side is being heavily subsidized with ANC tokens, making it almost pretty much free money to borrow. Even though we're seeing that, Anchor would only be able to pay out a 9.3%. So you have to always ask yourself, okay, what would happen if those ANC tokens were no longer being given? Because if those ANC tokens were removed, that borrow APR right now would be at around 10%. That's what it would cost to borrow. But we're struggling to attract borrowers when it's essentially a 0% interest. We're struggling. We're still running upside down. Anchor is still at a point where it definitely needs yield reserves to keep itself up. So what can Anchor do to help bridge this gap? To try to get the borrower side to grow as quickly as the deposit side has been growing? Well, there are a few things that are in the works. The first thing would be Anchor going cross-chain. If it does so, they will be able to accept different assets as collateral, which would essentially bring more borrowers to the platform. Right now, the two assets that you could use as collateral on Anchor would be Luna and ETH. And I think they have it now in the works. I guess I would hope in the next month or two they should come out with Sol for Solana and also Atom. So those two are being added. So we should see some increase in borrower side once those two come out. On top of that, there is also talk, and it looks very likely that they will also look to increase the LTV on the borrower side to 80%. And just to show you what that looks like. So again, if you're a borrower on Anchor, I just deposited 1 Luna for this example. Right now, it's kind of recommended that you should be at a 45% LTV, so loan to value. So basically, what you're borrowing, it begins at 45% of your collateral's value. And you can kind of see here that you would get liquidated if the loan is greater than 60% of your collateral's value. And that would happen, obviously, if your collateral drops in value, right? Well, they're going to raise this. They're going to raise this from a 60% LTV over to an 80% LTV. And the reason that would also help is because, well, people can essentially borrow more money. And if you're borrowing more money on that same asset, you'd be paying, more interest. It makes sense, right? They're essentially just allowing people to borrow more using the same collateral. And I would guess if they're still handling the risk side of things, I would imagine you typically want to leave a buffer in terms of LTV to make sure that you're never going to be in a situation that if there's a massive plummeting in the collateral's value, that you could always kind of ensure yourself that you'd be able to to recover the loaned amount through liquidations. Now, this user on Twitter, he actually provided a very nice Medium article that he put together, very good looking graphs, which we are going to cover right now. So in his models, he made a few models here. He was, he came to terms that basically the yield reserve has to be replenished. The question is by how much, and if so, how long would those yield reserves last, depending on the growth of anchors. So we're going to look at three models that he set up himself: the base model, the bear model, and also the bull model. So here we are at the base model. This considers a $481 million injection into the yield reserve starting the third week of February, right? So about the same dates we're talking about, the yield reserve going dry. Now, what this actually means is that if TFL were to take $481 million, throw into the yield reserve, they would be able to have 1 year to find a way to make Anchor's current 19.5% APY sustainable. This obviously considers some growth. So as we look down the chart here, we can see that as time goes by, the gap bridges right towards the end, especially in the last, it's about the last 10 to 20 weeks or so. So this considers the fact that yes, the growth side will at one point be able to grow at a higher rate, at a higher compounded rate than the deposit side. Let's take a look at the bear case here. The bear case would require over $1 billion deposited into the yield reserve. And in this case, the idea is that gap will never be bridged. The depositors will always grow at a quicker rate than the ones that are simply borrowing. So $1 billion will be depleted after 52 weeks. Now, when he runs these models, he has done it based on already historical data on how the amount of borrowing that's been occurring and the amount of depositing that's been occurring. He's been using those figures over the past few months to figure out the growth rates of things. But then it's just a matter of making assumptions that, okay, if we do add these other collaterals onto Anchor, and if we maybe move over the LTV, what can that possibly do, right? In this case, there's a more bearish viewpoint at it, basically saying that maybe even adding those assets wouldn't do much. But I mean, this is a graph that you kind of have to look at and be like, wow, $1 billion. $1 billion wouldn't be enough to sustain Anchor over the course of a whole year. And again, it's just a matter of not being able to bridge that gap between the two of them. But then sure, we can dive into the bull, and the bull model basically says, hey, listen, 120 million is all we need. And essentially after just, week 32, it becomes sustainable. Anchor somehow manages, that gap gets bridged in just, 5 or 6 months, and it's fully unsustainable, and it's even feeding the yield reserve at this point. Because again, the yield reserve can also go up as long as Anchor's collecting more than 19.5%, because then it goes into the yield reserve. So out of all of these three, I think to be honest, I think the bull case is the most optimistic. You're looking at basically a full-on turnaround in essentially 5 or 6 months. Like we go from a place of having depleting yield reserves to a place where we're basically filling up that yield reserve day after day after day, and having a sustainable model for the future. So how does the price of Luna affect Anchor as well? Well, when Luna is dropping a price, what ends up happening is that people on Anchor actually start getting liquidated. And if they do not get liquidated, then people actually look to repay their loan so they are not liquidated. And in that case, that actually means there's less people borrowing. So Luna going down in price actually puts a strain on the system because of that, especially when it comes to the existing borrowers. On the other hand, if Luna is actually going up in value, then that would mean that the existing borrowers, they could actually take additional loans on their collateral, because they might have had an LTV at the very beginning that was at 45%, but that LTV might only be 20% now if Luna had gone up in value. So now they can take a bit more money and bring themselves back up to 40% LTV. And again, if they're borrowing money, they're paying interest on it, right? So a higher Luna price does help Anchor, and as we've seen in the past 3 weeks now, Luna has dropped from over 100 down to 50, and that's been placing further strain on Anchor as people get liquidated or people repay back their loans. So what are our options right now? There's two options. Option number one, the yield reserve gets replenished. Option number two, it does not get replenished, and you simply allow that interest rate on Anchor that's being paid to the depositors to essentially just become a variable rate. Now, we do have this tweet from Doe, from the TFL team. He did send out a tweet just a few days ago saying that he made a poll, how much do we want the yield reserve to be replenished by? Everyone voted for 300 million. So based on this tweet, it does seem that is the direction that the TFL team will take, that they will essentially take 300 million and they will replenish the yield reserve of that amount. And I personally think that they should actually do that. I do think they should replenish the yield reserve and not allow it to become a variable rate, because right now that variable rate of 9.5% is simply not good enough. You have to think to yourself, so Anchor has been created as a marketing campaign for Terra. I found out about Terra due to Anchor. There's a good chance you found out about Terra due to Anchor. Many people do. Many people do. If Anchor's rate drops to 9.5%, people begin to have a lot of options. For example, imagine there's someone out there that right now is essentially using Celsius or Gemini. They have the opportunity to kind of like deposit their money within either one of those two and actually get paid like an 8 to 8.5 interest on their money. For most people, they're going to go after that, because why would they learn about DeFi? Why would they take on more risk and so forth for just an additional 1.5% when they could just keep their money in Gemini or keep it in Celsius and have a nifty looking app to calculate everything for them and tell them they're making money, right? People would prefer that. So 9.5% for Anchor is not going to be good. It's not going to be good for bringing in more people over to Anchor for sure. And Doe has made it clear in the past that Anchor is there to bring exposure and, more importantly, bring adoption over to UST. So it does make sense that for now that the yield reserve continues to get replenished while they really work every single day to figure out a way of what can they do to get those borrowers up. On top of that, Terra also needs to figure out on how they could develop more projects on Terra that look as exciting as Anchor. Right now, 44% of all the UST that has been minted is currently deposited within Anchor. 44%. That number is over 50% before we saw the huge exodus over the past couple of days, but over 50% of all the UST being minted was in Anchor. Just think about that for a second. If Anchor were to go like that, what do you think would happen to the price of Luna? It would dump. It would fall 80, 90%, no question about it. Right now, Anchor is extremely important to Terra and to Luna. Anchor needs to succeed at this point. Terra is not built out far enough for it to have enough exciting projects right now to retain the level of interest and to retain the current price that Luna has. It's plain as simple as that. On top of that, some people forget that there's many projects that have already launched or plan on launching that actually utilize Anchor's yield within their project. And if Anchor were to drop their yield to 19.5 right now, it would affect these projects. For example, Mirror. If you're delta farming on Mirror, you rely on the AUST on your short side for some returns, while your AUST would appreciate at half the amount if the yield reserves would dry up, right? You have Nexus, same thing. Nexus relies on depositing money into Anchor. It takes a loan out against your B Luna, deposits UST into Anchor, and in the meantime, it manages any liquidations, but you earn a yield from Anchor. Again, that would also come down. We have a project coming up right now, White Whale. Same thing. You deposit money into their vault, it stays within Anchor until they have to use it. So many projects out there are still utilizing Anchor. If Anchor drops that yield, it's going to affect many other projects within Terra. Ultimately, I feel like Anchor's always going to be chasing, it's going to be like a dog chasing its tail. Because whenever Anchor does come to a point where they are sustainable, let's say somehow they reach a point where they can be sustainable at 19.5% without having to rely on the yield reserve being replenished, deposits are going to flood in. People are going to say, wait a minute, it works. They figured out a way to make it work. Deposits are going to skyrocket in, and guess what? Once again, it's upside down. Once again, there's way too many depositors, not enough borrowers, and we go a step back. And I feel like this loop will forever be going on, that there's actually no time ever, how I would have to say that Anchor at 19.5 will ever be sustainable, simply because whenever it will get close to that, money's going to rush right in, and then you end up with this imbalance all over again. And that's my opinion about Anchor and where Anchor currently stands. So this will be a very interesting couple of weeks to kind of see what the decision is going to be. Again, I'm going to vote. Well, there's no voting, but I will want to see DOE replenish that yield, because any other option right now would not be good. Anchor is not, well, Terra is not ready for a 9.5% Anchor yield. It's going to have detrimental effects to the growth of Terra, without a question. So let's hope we see that replenishing. Now, if you enjoyed this video, if it was helpful, even if you do not agree with me, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this content. If you want to see more Terra-related content, make sure to subscribe. I also have a Discord for you to join. It's going to be in the description below. And other than that, thank you for listening and have a great day.